Alright guys, welcome to RC Mojo. This week we're going to put together the DuraFly Tundra V2 and give it a test fly. It's your standard modern day foamy, so all we really need to do is bolt on all the fiddly bits and stick a battery in. In the last video we did the first step and bent all the control surfaces back and forth to free them up. So this time we're going to start with the undercarriage. There's two main bits of wire to fit. The rear one doesn't have the axles for the wheels to run on, and the front one does. They do have a right way round too. You want the undercarriage to be slightly forward of the mount. If it's behind, flip them round. You'll also need to thread the wire through the collets at the end so the tabs end up facing inwards. In the middle there's another bit of wire that acts as the centre mount for the spring. It should just press into the holes, but I found one side didn't go all the way through, so the wire didn't sit nice and flush. A bit annoying, but it's easy enough to fix with a drill to clean up the hole. To clamp the undercarriage in, we used the two plastic parts which are marked L and R, along with 6 M2.5x8 screws. It's important that we tighten them up a little bit at a time so they go down nice and straight and don't add stress. They're a fairly tight fit, so we need to avoid building in any bends. Next, the collets need to have their grub screws tightened up against the wires. Now I put them far too close to the bend here. Once the wheel goes on, we'll have to move them a bit so the hub can spin freely. The grub screws should be done up nice and tight with the tabs facing inwards. Next, on the two tabs, we need to hang the two rods with the hooks bent into the ends. Then from the inside of the rods, we need to fit the two springs that hook onto the centre mount. This setup does look quite nice, but it doesn't really add all that much spring. The undercarriage is going to be very soft whether they're there or not. I found after a few heavier landings, the prop does get very close to the ground. The huge wheels simply slide onto the ends of the undercarriage. At least they would, but I found them just tight enough that you have to spin them over the threads. Once on all the way, they do spin nice and freely. Except if, like me, you fitted the collets a little bit close to the bend, you'll see they bind up quite badly. If you move the collet just a couple of millimeters and retighten, the wheels spin perfectly. To keep the wheels on, we use the plastic nuts. Now they thread straight onto the end of the undercarriage. Now, because they're plastic, they're going to be ever so easy to strip. So carefully do them up until the wheel just starts to bind, then back them off a bit. There's no need to do them up super tight. Rinse and repeat on the other side, and that's the fuselage on its main wheels. Very nice, if a little bit bulky for the space in my white box. To the tail next, and we need to drop the tail wheel into its slot under the rudder. The instructions now want us to use M3x6 screws either side of the wire to hold it in, but those holes are just way too small. So like many kits these days, we're going to start making it up as we go along. We need a pair of washer head screws ideally, and in the kit there's two sizes with self-tapping threads. The smaller one fits fairly well, but the washer just barely covers the wire. The larger one though is just about perfect. On the bag they're marked M2.3x6. Which could mean the manual missed out the 2 points, but who knows. As long as we end up with a safe model, it doesn't really matter. It would be nice if it all matched up though. To mount up the tailplane, we need to feed the carbon spar through the plastic mount in the tail. This will make for a very solid setup without the need to use any glue. Very nice. The tailplane halves just slide over the spar and press into the tail. To stop them from pulling out, we just use a plain head self-tapper on each side through into the plastic tabs. All the strength is in the spar, so these small screws are only there to stop anything from vibrating loose. Spinning the model round, we need to fit the screw to secure the joiner for the elevator halves. There's a hole right in the middle that you can access by pushing the rudder slightly to one side. I found one of the 2x8 self-tappers were a good fit. You just need to nip it up so it's snug. The last thing to do back here is to clip the ball joints together for the rudder and the elevator. Now you should be able to clip them up with just your fingers, but if not you can use pliers, but just be extremely careful. These joints are all that connects the linkage with the surface, so they need to be in good condition to be safe. Okay, if we move forward along the fuselage to the servo bay, we can set up the linkages. Under the cover we find the two tail servos. Each one has a quick link with a grub screw. We'll need to power up the servos on a servo tester or radio. But first, so the control surface doesn't jump and bind, we need to loosen the grub screw half a turn. Now if we power up a servo with a centered signal, it can center itself without stressing anything. A servo tester set to 1500 microseconds is ideal, but a transmitter, receiver and battery will work too. Just make sure the trims are all centered. Now while it's still powered, hold the elevator or rudder so they're centered and nip up the grub screw. Now I'm going to end up doing this again off camera as it's a little bit awkward, and while I'm at it I'll add a spot of blue thread lock. Again, these grub screws are all that's connecting the linkage to the servo, so if they fail, you are going to crash. Wings next, and there's not really that much to do. We need to fit the linkages and the swing keepers. Thankfully, it turned out the servo arms were already fitted in the right place, so we don't need to worry about trying to get at any of the screws. All we need to do is clip together the ball joint at the surface end. Just like the tail, if you need to use pliers, just be very careful. Then at the servo end we use a swing keeper. Now to fit them, the bent end of the wire pops through the hole in the servo arm. Then the keeper slides over the end of the wire and clips in place. They can be a bit awkward to clip in, so pliers to very gently squeeze them up while they're massaged can help. Just don't go full ham-fisted with them, as you'll just flatten them. They're only quite thin plastic. It's the same with the aileron. Clip the ball joint together and fit the keeper. And now would be a good time to test the servos, but the wings have a special connector that connects the wing to the fuselage, so we can't really hook up a servo tester. We'll need to fit them to the fuselage first. Having said that, if we're very gentle, we can manually run the servos. You're backdriving a gear train doing this, so you want to use as little force as you can. If you're violent with them, you can quite easily take a tooth off a gear. What becomes obvious pretty quickly is there's not quite enough clearance for the flap horn. The linkage does line up, so to fix it I'll just use a sharp knife to add a little bit of clearance. It's not really a big deal, but that's why you should check things as you go. After the little mod, we can move the flap all the way through its motion without anything catching or binding. Rinse and repeat with the other panel, and that's the wing ready to fit. Next up we can fit the wings, and you can see the 6-pin connector where the wing plugs in. A very nice feature if you're going to be taking the wings on and off for transport. Fiddling about with several servo extensions, especially on a cold day, really isn't any fun. Just in front of the connector we need to slide in the main carbon spar roughly halfway. Then slide on one of the wing panels. Now they should slide on smoothly, only getting hung up in the last centimetre or so. Hold the fuselage and press the wing in nice and straight with a little bit of a wiggle. The panel should go right in and hit the bottom of the mount. The 2 screw holes should line up if you look down from the top. And now here we have a problem. My white box really is sized up for 1/10 scale trucks. It's just a little bit on the full side. So we'll need to move to another bench. But I was a bit excited and really wanted to get on with the build, so we have a lovely lighting setup of the sun through the window to the right, an overhead white LED panel in the middle, and a warm white room light. The video really didn't look so bad on the camera's display, but here we are. Thankfully, there's not that much left to do. With the second wing panel pushed in, we can install the 4 small self-tappers to stop the wings falling off. They're only really there to keep the panels in the mount. All of the flight load will be handled by the spar and the struts. In fact, the manual says you can just use sticky tape if you're not flying aggressively. Next, we can flip the model over and fit the struts. They're sided and ended, so make sure you get them the right way round. It's obvious if you've got them backwards, as they really don't want to fit in the cutouts. It's worth noting, by resting the model on the wing, we're actually flattening out the dihedral, so the struts will appear to be a little bit too long. Lift the fuselage a little bit in the middle and they'll pop into place. At the ends we just use machine screws to mount them, and if you're going to keep the wings fitted between sessions, do check these screws are done up. I found they do tend to work loose fairly quickly, so definitely add that to your pre-flight check. When the struts are fitted, the whole structure becomes very solid and rigid, not at all like the floppy old foamies of 20 years ago. Next up we have the radio. Now how it's set up is entirely dependent on the brand that you choose. You'll need to follow the manual or a guide for your particular system. The receiver ends up getting velcroed down behind the wing on a shelf near the tail servos. As we connect everything up, we need to neatly route all the wires to meet up with the radio. I've connected up most of the servos, but left the ESC disconnected for now, so we can safely power it up with a receiver battery without having to worry about the motor. I've got the bind button held down to put the receiver in bind mode, so we can bind it to a jumper T16. Once bound, you'll probably find all the control surfaces will be out of whack. You'll need to adjust the servo reverses, subtrims and endpoints at the very least. There's also the dual or triple rates, but this isn't an OpenTX guide video, so I'll leave that all up to you. With the flaps, this isn't the simplest model to set up, but if you take your time and work through it one control at a time, it's all quite manageable. Once it's all set up, you can connect the ESC throttle to the throttle channel, and optionally connect the reverser channel to another channel so you can run the motor backwards for reverse thrust. I'd recommend using a momentary switch so you can't accidentally leave it in reverse. In my case, I'm using the throttle normally to give forward thrust, but if I hold this switch on the top, the throttle goes backwards. If you're only flying off solid ground, it's not really that useful. Off water though, you can get the model unstuck from the bank without having to walk or go for a swim. The ESC has some Velcro already stuck to it, so all we do is peel off the sticky and stick it to the side of the fuselage. It needs to be in the open towards the front, so there's a nice bit of air all around it. There's plenty of venting for airflow, so it's not hugely critical. The battery just sits on a plywood mount and has a Velcro strap. Not a bad idea, except there's nothing to stop it sliding forwards and backwards. Off camera, I'm going to stick a couple of foam blocks down before the first flight so it can't shake itself out of place. There's one more thing to do before we head outside to get away from this lighting. The top of the wing has lots of little holes to mount turbulators. They disturb the airflow over the wing, and I think they're supposed to improve low-speed flight. To fit them, we'll just use some Yoo-Hoo pour, a couple of small blobs on the back, and pop them in place. Now I've flown Tundras with and without the turbulators installed, and without, the model definitely wants to fly faster, with a tendency to be a bit more tippy when you really push the stall speed. If you're going to be flying the model like a bush plane, I'd definitely install them. If all you want to do is fly around at speed though, I'd go without, and you might gain a little bit extra flight time with the lower drag. We've still got the prop to fit, but it just hovers up to the end of the motor shaft and a nut goes on, so there's not really anything to worry about. The centre of gravity needs to be 50 to 60 mm from the leading edge. I found it to be very easy to balance without any extra weight needed. Just move the battery until it's right. Moving outside now, we can have a better look at all the bits that were hard to see on the bench. Under the canopy we have the battery fitted up with a couple of blocks of foam to keep it in position. I believe if you're going to use the floats, the battery would need to move quite a long way forwards. The prop on the front is a very nice fit and looks rather good, but if you're a bit of a crashy flyer, you might want to swap it for an APCE of the same size. Apparently they do work a little bit better, and of course they're very easy to replace. Round the back, under the servo bay hatch, we have the receiver mounted across the fuselage with some more Velcro. The antennas have also been positioned with a little bit of sticky tape. One runs across and the other fore and aft along the side of the fuselage. For the first flight, we're going to be quite conservative. The plan is to get the trim set up so the model flies nice and straight at a cruising throttle. Sorry about the focus on this clip, it's just ever so slightly off. The second flight will be nice and crisp though. It's always tempting, if the model feels good in the air, to immediately start wringing it out, but you'll want to fly it around for a few minutes, land and check all the screws and clips. And as if just to prove the point, after the first flight I went to remove the battery and the plywood tray came out with it. Yep, all that holds the battery in is the glue under the plywood, which isn't great. Now we could just glue the wood back in, but I really wanted something a bit more robust. I found on Thingiverse a rather nice mount that makes it much easier to get at the Velcro to fit and remove the battery. I'll put a link to it in the description. It's got a set of posts on the bottom that dig into the foam, so it ends up being really secure. You can actually lift the entire model by the battery mount, so it's not going to go anywhere in flight. For the second flight we're going to play about a bit more, some high throttle loops and stuff, and we'll do some low throttle cruising. I must say, while it does the high throttle flight rather well, it really excels at low and slow, which isn't surprising considering it's a short takeoff and landing bush plane. So I'm going to leave this clip running and say the usual sign off. Next time with the Tundra we'll build up and have a play with the FPV mount, which should be fun. So for now that's about it. Thanks for watching, like if you liked, subscribe if you haven't, and leave a comment if there's something on your mind. Bye guys! Going up.
That's 50%.
Half flat. He's a bit tippy on flaps, as you can see. But for a short approach, it should work. So the flaps up if we come around. And line up. And apply a little bit of flap.
That's 50%.
Kind of works. Okay.